I would like to preface this talk with a trigger warning. Throughout the talk this evening, I will be mentioning the following words several times: poo, turd, feces, back-end bomb, tail-end torpedo, and rear-end rockets, and of course anal sphincter. There will also be images of these things, and I apologize in advance if that causes you discomfort. Good evening, everyone. As Phil said, my name is Jack, and today we shall be answering the question, why is wombat poo cube-shaped? And we can interpret this question in two different ways. Number one, what are the advantages of cube-shaped feces? And number two, what processes lead a wombat to create cube-shaped feces? Just going to kick off with number one. Some of you might be aware that some animals use poo to communicate. And one thing that you don't want to do if you're an animal and communicating with poo is hide that poo in the grass, because no one can see it. The best place is to put your poo is in fact high up on a rock for everyone to see. But if, like me, you've tried to poo on a rock before, you'll know just how difficult it is. Because the problem with human poo is that it's cylindrical in nature. So what happens, it rolls down the rock and into your shoe. And that makes me personally very, very sad. Now, us humans, we got over this problem by developing speech to communicate. Wombats, on the other hand, they took a different approach and decided to make cube-shaped feces. And that's finally what we'll be discussing, part number two, what processes lead a wombat to create cube-shaped feces. And the greatest groundbreaking research done in this field is actually published in a paper titled Intestines of Non-Uniform Stiffness Mold the Corners of Wombat Feces. And my personal favorite is, yes, someone did mention the fact that it was published in the journal Titan Soft Matter. Very fitting indeed. And the good thing about this paper, it kicked things off by, discussing the running theories of why wombats have cube-shaped feces. And at the start of the paper, they had a line, which I'll quote: "If wombats were to make cubes similar to the way we make noodles, we would expect a square-shaped, square anal sphincter." And you might be wondering, well, Jack, how do we determine the shape of a wombat's anal sphincter? Well, it's quite simple. We throw a wombat in a machine that costs us millions of dollars and give it a CT scan. And here we can see that CT scan. And you might be able to spot in the middle there our lovely anal sphincter. But one thing you might notice is that it is a round anal sphincter and not a square anal sphincter. So this theory of a square anal sphincter, we can throw out the window because it's trash. So now, you know it was crack? Very fitting, yes. There might be a couple times I say that this evening. So yes, now we know it has to be happening, this cube-making process has to be happening inside the wombat itself. And what we do? Well, we open up a wombat. Here we have the lovely picture of a 3-meter wombat intestine. And you'll see that it starts off on the top right, a lovely yellow slurry, and we work our way down finally to nice round cubes on the bottom left. The top right is where it leads to stomach, and bottom left rather, is where we leave that round anal sphincter that we mentioned earlier. You will see also, one thing to keep in mind is that there's a slower transition from yellow to brown, and that actually indicates that the poo is drying as it travels through the intestine. So we're going to be coming back to that later, so please keep that in mind. By looking at this picture, you can tell that this cube-making process is in fact happening inside the intestine itself. Scientists, I know, very exciting. Scientists, they wanted to measure the intestine. More specifically, they wanted to measure the stiffness of the intestine. And if you've ever done a first-year physics course, what you do to measure the stiffness of a spring is let a spring hang, add a weight, and see how much the spring extends. They did the exact same thing with a piece of wombat intestine. And what they found was rather interesting. if you have the cross-section of your wombat intestine, so have a little circle, it was actually the most stiff on opposite sides of the intestine. And knowing this, they could now create a mathematical model for our wombat intestine. And boy, is it a doozy. On the left-hand side, you can see that they've modeled it by putting a lot of springs together. The red springs have a higher stiffness as opposed to the blue springs, which have a lower stiffness. And they simulated the contractions of the intestine by lengthening and shortening these springs. On the right-hand side, we actually have a mathematical model of our poo. And this is essentially our poo profile. And you'll see, as these contractions occur, just how the shape of the poo changes. And finally, we end up with something that is very, very remotely square-shaped. By changing some of the parameters I talked about earlier, we do end up with a very nice square shape indeed. And scientists now, you have to wonder, maybe the wombat poo, why doesn't it come out as one big long prism? Poo prism. Why instead does it come out with these little cubes? That was a mystery for a long time, but thankfully earlier this year it was answered in this paper, Drying Dynamics of Pellet Feces, once again published in Soft Matter. And this paper was actually inspired by the natural landscape in Northern Ireland. This here is the Giant's Causeway, and it's been a long time known in geophysics that these regular cracks form through the slow cooling of lava. It turns out it's the slow drying of the wombat poo in the intestine that creates similar, regularly spaced cracks. And I'll explain a bit more detail. The poo, as it travels through the intestine, it dries from the outside in. And that outside layer, it contracts, and that, decreases the volume, creates a lot of stress when interacting with that middle wet region. And this stress is only released once these cracks form. These cracks are released of that stress. And you can see the scientists have actually correctly modeled it with a cornstarch mixture on the bottom there. They did it. We've finally answered the question of why wombats have square-shaped feces. I hope, ladies and gentlemen, yes, big round of applause for wombat. I hope, ladies and gentlemen, that walking away from today, you have a newfound appreciation for wombats and their very delicate droppings. And remember that sometimes it's cool to be square. Thank you very much.